Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the host of Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000 and the former Bears wide receiver. Please welcome Tom Waddle to the program. Tom, it's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. How are you? Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thanks for being here. What was your reaction to that tough Monday night loss for the Bears?
I think my first reaction was more the same. It was a bad football game. Played by two bad football teams at this point, to be brutally honest. I mean, the Vikings, despite their 7-7 record, I believe that's where they are now with the win. Not an overly impressive team, and I think that they probably are facing some of the same organizational changes that the Bears are facing when the season comes to an end. But from the Bears, again, struggles on offense. Defensively, I will say this: the one thing. So I had two thoughts. The first was more the same. The second was, I was so proud would be the wrong word, and that's kind of a self-serving term to use, but I was so glad to see that entire secondary was a group of guys that weren't starters, probably didn't know many of them. Thomas Graham Jr. gets a start despite kind of finding himself way down the depth chart. All four of them went out there and played. And John, I got to tell you, like, as a guy who has the history that I have, that toiled on the practice squad for a couple of years and then finally got an opportunity to play and then went out and, did some decent things and proved that I belonged and then had an opportunity to develop a career. I watched that game and I think that's kind of I've already mailed in where the Bears are going and things that are doing, but from an enjoyment standpoint, I was just, again, I'm proud is probably the wrong word, but it was great to see a couple of players who, had been, I would say, struggling, but have been fighting, grinding, and trying to get that opportunity. And then they did on national television, and guys went out there and they played their asses off in their secondary. So, I mean, obviously, Alec Ogletree played well. Roquan Smith continues to play great, and Robert Quinn. Robert Quinn in 2021 is the player that I was hyped about coming into the 2020 season. Like, Robert was, I think, led the league in win percentage in terms of pass rush situations when he was coming, I believe, from the Cowboys, and we signed him as a free agent. And everyone at our station, I was like, this is a good idea. Kid can play. Not a kid. He's a talented, accomplished veteran. And then when he had the 2020 that he did, everyone pointed at me like I was an idiot. And so now I'm getting a decent amount of revenge for my Robert Quinn support. So we saw once again Monday night Robert doing what he does, and he deserves his Pro Bowl accolade. So more of the same, and just love seeing some young guys go out there, get their chance, and deliver.
Was that the worst you've ever seen the offense play, like all season?
Wow. Well, I mean, I think we've obviously forgotten the Cleveland game pretty quickly. That one was pretty bad. I could give you the Tampa Bay game as well as evidence but yeah, I mean, it's been a culmination of all of that stuff. I was one, and I probably said this to you before when we've talked. I was one that believed there was more job security for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace. I know that there's a great respect for them from Ted Phillips and George McCaskey's perspective, specifically George. They like these guys. They are wonderful human beings. They just haven't done a very good job at what they've been enlisted to do. And my perspective all along is their comfort level with these guys was going to give them significant job security. But there was always the caveat for me that unless things do go sideways and disaster hits. And I mean, I think you could point to the Cleveland game and the Tampa game and the Ravens game, how that one went, and, any number of different things. So disaster has set in for this team. And I think that because of that, they will see significant change throughout the organization. And, but to go back to your original question, it's been inept all year offensively. So I'm not that surprised based on, the track record for this team in 2021.
Who do you think comes in for Matt Nagy to replace him as coach?
That's the cart before the horse for me. I think you can put a nice list of guys together and then you will allow the new people in charge to make those decisions. I think to talk about who the next coach is for me is a bit premature until you've decided that you need to make a change at the president's spot and you need to make a change at the general manager's spot. Who's going to come in and interview these guys? So, I mean, you can bring in all these candidates, everyone wants them to fire Matt Nagy now. And I mean, okay, you get your pound of flesh, but who then is going to interview Eric Bieniemy or Byron Leftwich or Brian Dable or any of these guys that you may be bringing in to replace him at the end of the year? I mean, I wouldn't be comfortable if I was a head coach coming in and talking to a general manager who I thought had no job security, or having a president of football ops sitting in, and he wasn't going to be in his current role going forward as well. So I think the new NFL rule is muted for this Bears team because of the situation they have above the head coaching spot. So again, I haven't put that much thought into who the next coach will be, but there are plenty of guys to look at. It's going to be a wild ride. I just want to make sure the guys in control of the vehicle are different people.
Do you really think, though, they're actually going to fire like Ted Phillips or Ryan Pace? I've heard rumors that maybe they'd reassign Ryan Pace, they'd keep him around. Do you actually think those guys go?
That's where my money would be. Like, this is the first time I felt that way. And again, as I just said to you, John, I was one of the guys that believed, and I remember doing an interview with guys on Sirius XM at the start of the year. And Bruce Murray and Brady Quinn basically just screamed at me and said, how can you say that Matt Nagy's not on the hot seat? Well, I'm going to have to apologize to them at the end of the year. But, I thought that as long as they were, somewhat decent, they were going to keep them around because of the comfort level. And again, I go back to what they did last year. And that's why I was an advocate of them making the changes last season in the off season. And look, I'm not out there calling for people's jobs. I know how hard it is to succeed in this league. But I thought it was absurd for them to go through the same process again with the same general manager and the same coach to try and resurrect an offense that hadn't shown any progress. And you're going to allow the same guys to draft a new quarterback and try to develop that new quarterback. And if it doesn't work and you have a scintilla of concern that these are the right guys, then you've got to make the change now, because George knew that they were going to draft a quarterback, or that was the focus after deciding to let Mitch go. So just how the dominoes fell was just strange to me. So I guess the point is I thought there was security there. I don't anymore. And I do believe that for the first time really ever, I think that there is an appetite for significant change. I think how they do business changed when they decided to invest in the property in Arlington Heights and buy the racetrack. Now that's still got miles to go before they cross all the T's and dot all the I's. But I think that was the first sure sign that business is being done differently. It was the right decision, in my opinion. It was the only business decision. But it's the first sign that I think that this organization and this family has a different direction. And I think that means, again, just pure speculation, that I know that they're very fond of Ted Phillips. Maybe they moved Ted into a business ops. Like if you go back and look what the Cubs did when they brought Theo in, they took Crane Kenny, kept him in the organization, just made him, in charge of business ops. Maybe you assign Ted to being in charge of the project in Arlington Heights. I know that there's a great deal of respect for Ryan, but John, you can't fail upwards and that be acceptable. Like you can't reassign Ryan as the president. You can't move Ted to in charge of the Arlington Heights project and then put Ryan as your president. Like, so then the president's in charge of hiring the general manager. Oh, by the way, that was you. And you're going to hire your replacement because you couldn't do your job well enough. Like that's more absurd than status quo to me. So I do think that there will be change. And if, push comes to shove and you made me put my own money down on it, I think that they will make changes at the president's spot, the general manager spot, and the coaching spot. And I think it's because it hasn't worked in the past. And the only way you're going to get true change is to be willing to make that change. And I think you're finally going to see it.
Tom Waddle here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tom, what do you make of Justin Fields' development here in his rookie year?
I'm not going to lie. I thought I thought I'd be more impressed overall. I mean, obviously there are flashes. The kid's, a brilliant athlete. He's got a big time arm. The thing that I'm most encouraged by is there's no residual, stuff that exists with him after he struggles. Like you could have ruined that young man after the game plan you put in play against the Cleveland Browns. Next week against the Lions, he went out there and played well. There have been moments where he has struggled, but it doesn't, there's no residual for him. It doesn't last, and he moves on to the next play. And I think that shows a lot of maturity and an understanding that, it's not all going to go the way that you want it to go. Now, with that said, And I think Monday night was an example of, I thought he'd be further along in terms of, and maybe it's just, individual situations, but pocket presence. You can't take the sacks. You can't run into the sacks that he runs into. Seems to be, consistently high when he's inaccurate with the ball. Now, look, he doesn't have a ton to work with right now. I think the Bears collectively are the most covered group of wide receivers in the league. If you use some of the metrics, like they provide the least amount of space between the defenders. But that's, that's not Justin's fault, but you've got to learn to throw into tight windows. You got to learn what's open in the NFL wasn't, is different than what was open at the collegiate level. The game moves quicker. I'm not down on him, John. I would never say, oh, the kid's a bust. Nor would I say, I guarantee you that he's going to be, the next Russell Wilson or the next Josh Allen. I'm not ready to go there either because I haven't seen enough consistent play. I need to see him next year. I think it's foolish. Even going back to Mitch, and at the end, I was critical of Mitch, and I didn't think that his arc was going the direction that they needed him to go. But you had to be patient with Mitch, and I think anyone who made came to a conclusion after 1 year, it's really hard to do. So I'm not ready to go there yet with Justin Fields. I would say I'm more optimistic about where he can go than I was with Mitch. I think there's more pure skill. I think there's a better understanding of the position. But by no means has he gone out and wowed me on a consistent basis. Like I said, he doesn't got a lot to work with. I think the game plan lacks at times. What's in his huddle, you could get better at as well. But there have been moments where I was like, wow, I wish it was better than this for sure.
Do you think maybe next year with a new coach or a new game plan, new scheme, maybe better players, he could take a really significant step?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's when you really judge him and see who he can be. It's hard. Now you're going to have to go. This is why I circle back to what I said about at the end of last year. If you had any idea, if there was any doubt in your mind that this was the right group to pick the quarterback and develop the quarterback, well, then, obviously it's the benefit of hindsight, but this was something that I talked about last year. I think that they made a mistake not making a change a year ago, because now, and I think, again, for the reason I mentioned, his maturity and his ability not to stay down when he gets down, he'll be fine adjusting to a new scheme and a new staff and a new whatever, but it's not ideal. It just isn't. It's not ideal to have a young quarterback have to come in and learn a second system. You go back and look at some of Jay's, Jay would tell you having as many offensive coordinators as he had when he was here wasn't beneficial to him. Now he'll also own his mistakes, but not ideal for Justin. But I think a new voice will do him good. And then we'll find out what he's got in 2022.
What kind of characteristics do you think would best suit him in an offensive scheme?
That's a great question. I'd like to see them move the pocket a little bit more. They've done some of that. I think he can adapt to a lot of things, but he's not ball out quick guy. That's not what he does. You go back to Ohio State and if you look at some of the numbers and look, he was a brilliant player at Ohio State. I'm not being critical. I mean, you can argue his performance at Ohio State rivaled what we saw from Deshaun Watson and even Trevor Lawrence going back, a few drafts earlier. But everything was deep drop, hold the ball for 4 seconds, allow your fantastic athletes at wide receiver, these long developing combo routes. They're eventually going to get behind their corners and their safeties and then let her rip. And his deep ball accuracy at the collegiate level was unbelievable. That's why I was a little surprised this year. He seems to throw everything on one speed. And for a receiver, that's hell. It just is. When you're throwing fastballs on hitches and you're throwing fastballs on a line on balls that need to be looped in a soft spot of cover two. We saw that in the Monday night game on one side of the end zone, not the ball that Mooney caught and then was out of bounds. That one's a good example too. But the better one is when he overthrows it. He's wide open. That's got to be a touch pass. You can't throw that with the same velocity that you're throwing, the 9 routes down the field. So you go back to his collegiate days and it was different. So I guess the point I'm making is if you expect to bring in a guy that's going to run, the true West Coast offense where you're 1-2 ball out, that's going to take some time for him because it's not. And I think you've seen that. You go through some of the metrics. I think there was an article on ESPN that, was not very flattering. It acknowledges he doesn't have a ton around him and he's a rookie and rookies struggle. But, he's taken hits in a lot of ways because he's hanging onto the ball longer than you would expect. And you bring Andy Dalton in and Andy's a different player. Ball's coming out a half a second earlier. Now, I'm not suggesting Andy should be playing. Justin should be playing. But the system, I think you're going to have to tailor it to him. I think you're going to have to run some more, max protection or a couple 2-man routes and give him some time because that's where he's comfortable. You're going to have to ask him to adjust and the ball will have to come out sooner. You're going to have to incorporate the run, because it's what he does that well and get him on the edge. I think he's most comfortable on the edge. I think you got to run some up tempo. So, you just can't. I just don't think that if you thought you were going to run a quick West Coast offense with him, I think you're putting, square peg, round hole. I mean, he's got to learn to adjust to some of that, but then you've got to adjust to him as well. I think you'll have more of a hybrid. But the ball does have to come out in this league because they'll get you.
How do you think he compares to some of his other rookie counterparts, Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones? Where does he stand in that sort of class?
I think he's, I don't think he's been as well. Nobody really has had the Mac Jones has had, but Mac Jones found the perfect spot. I was a fan of Mac Jones when the guys came out. And I'm no scout, I'm no quarterback guru, but I had Lawrence 1, I had Fields 2. I just thought the ceiling was for Justin was higher. That doesn't mean I didn't like Mac Jones. I like Mac Jones a ton. I think he's tremendously accurate. I just at the NFL level, and you ask him to do some things athletically, he can't do what Justin can do. But that doesn't mean he can't be successful. He's in a great system with Bill Belichick and with Josh McDaniels. They don't ask him to do, don't have him be the savior. They run the football, they boot, the ball comes out quick, they run screens, they play good defense. He found a great system and that will help him, as a rookie, you just don't want to be inundated with hell. And they keep some of that hell off of him. Our guy's, walking through the fires of hell in a lot of the situations that he finds himself in. I watched a couple games of Jacksonville, and you see the flashes of Trevor Lawrence that make you excited, but you also see him pressing and doing the things that Justin does at times. I think they've all struggled. The kid in New York, he was the one that I thought was going to be most likely to struggle early. It's not just because of where he's at, but I just didn't think. And Trey Lance is just not, he's not ready. I mean, he's raw as the day is long. He didn't play last year. I think he had 1 year coming out of college at a smaller school. I watched him in preseason, and he's another guy that throws the ball 1 speed at all times. Like he's throwing 110-mile-an-hour heaters on hitch routes, and his receivers are looking at him like, bro, you got to stop. You can't do that. So, it takes some time. I wouldn't give up on any of them for sure. You know what it does though, John? It makes you go back last year and appreciate what you saw from Justin Herbert. I had this conversation with Silvy on the show the other day that Justin Herbert's rookie campaign last year puts all of these guys to shame. He just does. Like Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, all of them. You go back and look at what he did behind a shaky offensive line. Had some weapons, has good players, but in a coaching situation where, Anthony Lynn was on the hot seat, you didn't know what was going to happen. And he became this year the first player in NFL history to throw for 30 touchdowns in each of his first 2 seasons. So, when I watch Justin play, I want to see him do what Justin Herbert does. But again, different circumstances. And, every now and again, and I will tell you this, I know one thing about Justin Herbert. I knew in Oregon, he really didn't. I knew he was impressive physically, but I don't think what he did at Oregon was anything that I was overly optimistic about. But he has been fantastic, and what he did in his rookie season is significantly more impressive than what I've seen from any of this group. But it's, the reason why you're drafted in the top 15 as a quarterback in this league is usually because the team you're going to stinks. Mac Jones is the difference here. And maybe you can argue that with Trey Lance as well. I think the 49ers are built a little better than the other teams, but it's hard to be a young quarterback drafted high in the first round and have any measure of success in your first year. And that's why, again, I stay optimistic about Justin, because he's let a lot of this stuff, roll off his shoulders. He's not affected by it. But look, he hasn't been the player that I hoped he'd be as a rookie, but you can't judge him based on 10 starts in the NFL.
How close are the Bears to contending? That might be an open-ended question, but
no, I don't. I mean, the NFL is the easiest place to go last to first. I mean, we see it all the time. I mean, it happens every year. But I wouldn't put my money on that. I mean, I think they're a full rebuild. I really do. I think they're a rebuild. I think that, you've got some pieces, but I would look at them as a full rebuild. If it was me looking at this team, I'm not convincing myself that they can compete for anything in 2022. Now, the optimal thing to do is to rebuild and compete at the same time, and teams do that. I wouldn't put my eggs in that basket, meaning I wouldn't be out there signing expensive veteran players. I just wouldn't. I mean, and these concepts fight against each other because they don't have the draft currency that you would like, because Ryan's made a lot of decisions to move up. You got to hope that Tevin Jenkins and Larry Borum are your guys at tackle. I liked what I saw from Jenkins. I watched the game again on Tuesday morning. He's got to clean up the penalties for sure, but I think there's some talent there, especially for a kid who had no training camp. But I would treat the whole team like it was something that needed to be rebuilt. That would be my approach. And if you surprise me throughout the course of early in the season, then fantastic. But I'm going into 2022, hey, our first goal here is to solidify different areas. And that, for me, has got to be your O-line. You got to look at the entire offensive line. You can't have your future invested in this quarterback again, not protecting. You just can't.
Tom Waddle, still here on Sports Talk Chicago. Tom, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, is it true that you outran Deion Sanders for a touchdown?
Okay, we're the holiday season, so the truthful answer is no. Okay, I got a picture, John, because I knew you were going to ask me this. This is a picture of me crossing the goal line at Soldier Field. That's Deion swiping at my ankles. That's the myth. The legend is I outran Deion, but I ran a little route on. I think it was against. I think it was Bobby Butler. I think it was little, as I would do, little in route, and then as soon as I caught the ball, I turned it upfield. Deion was on the other side of the field. So, do the geometry here. I'm running a straight line. Deion is what it would be the isosceles part of the triangle. He's got to go a further distance, and I'm just running straight. Here comes Deion this way, and he didn't catch me. So, he wasn't trailing me. It wasn't like we started at the 40-yard line and I just ran into the goal line. I was on one side of the field. He came from the other side of the field. But, the video evidence is that I'm going into the end zone and Deion's swiping at my feet. I loved Deion Sanders. I got to tell you, he was across from me the majority of the game. Played against him when he was with the 49ers as well. But everyone, and maybe Deion was, mouthy to other people, but when we were on the field, I never heard word one from Deion. Deion was not a talker, at least when I was there. But so I appreciated him. He was such a great player. And then I got to work with him in Los Angeles at the NFL Network and, became friends with him. So I have nothing but respect for that guy. He greatest cornerback I ever played against. I played against Darrell Green as well. I would say Deion, was a better corner. I mean, Darrell was a Hall of Famer as well. But I think Deion, I don't think he had a peer, from my perspective. But yeah, so the answer to your question, John, is no, I didn't. It was not a flat race. It just wasn't. It wasn't a fair race. That's for sure.
He didn't say anything to you after the play, or no comment?
No. He was too busy, picking, grass out of his face mask because he had thrown it at me, No, it's just funny. He was such a good dude too. We ended up beating the Falcons that day pretty good. The story I tell, I'm 54 years old now. This is a story I've told my entire life. I believe it, I do believe this is true. And there's no malicious intent in it in any way, shape, or form. But I played against Deion for the entire game and had a pretty good game when we played the Falcons. And I do remember afterwards at the middle of the field, Deion coming over and saying, "Hey, great kid, great game, great game, whatever." And the legend is that he said to me, this is how I remember it, "Hey, you're the best white wide receiver I've ever played against." And I go running into the locker room and I see my buddies on the time my buddy John Mangum, was a safety of ours, came from Alabama, was a good friend of mine. And he's like, "Hey man, good game. You had such a great game. Would you have 3 catches for 40 or 50 yards? That's a big game for me and a touchdown." I said, "Yeah, but that's not the best part of it." And John goes, well, how's it getting any better than that? You had a big game. You scored a touchdown. We beat the Falcons in convincing fashion. I said, after the game at the 50-yard line, Deion told me I played a great game and I was the best wide receiver he'd played against. And John laughs and he goes, well, there's you, there's Ricky Prohl, there's Eddie McCaffrey. There's only 3 of you in the league. So, I don't know how true that is. So, John was always there to kick me in the groin when things were good. But loved Deion. He was a great player, great guy. He was a great guy to work with at the NFL Network. And he's doing good things in college football now. So,
before we finish up today, last question. What's the funniest locker room moment you've had with the Bears?
The funniest locker room. Well, okay. Well, there were so many characters in that. I mean, Jim Morrissey is a good friend of mine. And like Jim Morrissey, his trick was, and he had a lot of them. There was 2 of them. Like, okay, I think Glenn Kozlowski did one of them. We used to get glazed donuts every Saturday, and rookies had to bring them in. And I think one time, Koz was expecting to get, it was Koz and Morrissey were always getting after each other, and Trace Armstrong and Ron Rivera and all the guys. Koz took a regular donut and dipped it in the paraffin wax. So it looked like a glazed donut, but it was a donut. It was a plain donut that had been dipped in the wax. And he was expecting Morrissey to come through as we were going onto the field on a Saturday walkthrough to pick it up and eat it. Morrissey goes through. He's not having it, not having donuts that day. Koz is standing behind the door looking at him. Ditka comes walking through, picks up the donut, takes a bite out of it, thinking it's a glazed donut. It's a donut with paraffin wax on it. Koz is expecting it to be like Morrissey's trying to get it. Morrissey. And it's Coach, and Coach bites it, throws it, starts swearing at people. And, nobody ever told him what had happened. And then Morrissey, one day, we had phones on the same route out to the, this was an NFL franchise, and I was so blessed to play. I loved it, but we were at the old facility on Washington Avenue in Lake Forest, and it's where Lake Forest College, but it was a rundown building. Like the basement would flood. You'd walk out back. You had to walk up the hill to get to the field. There was bees everywhere. You'd get stung once a week going up to the field. But anyway, as you walked out, there was these line of phones. There was 3 phones that you could call. I mean, nobody had a cell phone. Some people did, but like you could call. So Morrissey would always take shaving cream and put it on the ear part of the phone and then put it on top of the thing and then say, hey, somebody, you got phone call. And then you come over and put his phone. So Morrissey's trying to get Cat Boso. So Morrissey's got the shaving cream in the phone. He's got it sitting on top of the phone. He says, hey, Cat, you got a phone call. Cap's over there not paying attention. Singletary walks through and he's like, this phone's off the hook. Mike picks up the phone and puts it in his ear, like just trying to, trying to figure out what is it. So Morrissey trying to get Caposo gets Mike Singletary, and Mike was a very stoic guy. You didn't mess with Mike, and Mike's got all this shaving cream in his ear. I mean, it was stuff like that on a daily basis. I mean, it's like people ask me all the time, hey, do you miss playing? I'm like, no, I don't miss playing, but I miss the guys. I mean, it was 53 immature 30-year-olds just having the time of their lives. So, I mean, I miss that. That's for sure.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate the time. Best wishes on the program for Waddle and Silvy. You guys do great work, and can't wait till we catch up again very soon. Thank you so much.
You got it, John. Thanks for having me. Happy holidays, buddy.